The first kick didn't land on the door. It landed on the wheelchair. Metal scraped tile. A garland slipped off the knob and fell like a green snake. Zuri, 12 years old with legs that didn't always listen, grabbed the armrest as the chair lurched. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She only blinked up at the man whose last name she carried. "Out," Marcus said, breath steaming in the cold of a December night that had crawled into the hallway. "Both of you. Out now." Behind him, the Christmas tree glowed with soft lights. A red angel, hand-stitched by Grandma Adesua, leaned a little as if listening to the argument. The house breathed cinnamon and smoke from jollof in the oven and mac and cheese warming on low. Music from the radio, Mahalia Jackson singing about a holy night, kept playing, like the house refused to believe the people inside it could be this cruel. Sharon, thin from worry, braided hair pulled into a scarf, stood between her daughter and the door. "Marcus," she said. She used the soft voice she saved for customers at the hair salon or for lost children in church aisles. "It is Christmas Eve." "You think I don't know the date?" Marcus swiped at his phone. In the living room, a woman in a tight silver dress leaned against the mantel. Her name was Tanika. She had a red coat draped over her shoulders like a queen's cape, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You think I care?" Tanika said, her nails flashing like knives when she adjusted an earring. "You said you were done playing house, baby. Handle it." Marcus squared his shoulders. "Handle it," he repeated, as if the words gave him armor. He stepped forward. For a second, he looked past Sharon and stared at the wheelchair. "I'm not paying for dead weight anymore." Zuri's fingers tightened and then loosened. Her voice, when it came, was steady. "I am not dead weight." Sharon drew breath like the air hurt. "You will not speak about her that way." "We can talk about it tomorrow," Marcus said. "You can come pick up your things tomorrow when I'm not here. But tonight, you leave. I promised Tanika we'd have a quiet evening. Adults only. Grown folks." He reached around Sharon, grabbed the handle of the wheelchair, and swung it toward the door as if he were hefting a suitcase. Zuri's head jerked back. Sharon lunged, grabbed the chair's other handle, and for a second they stood there, both holding the same weight, both refusing to lose. "Marcus," Sharon said, each syllable breaking. "Please." He leaned in close, voice gone whisper dark. "You want me to make it worse." A wind rose outside, pushing sleet against the porch roof, scattering the plastic reindeer in the yard. The string of lights along the window hummed. There were sounds of plates clinking. The neighbors across the street were hosting cousins and aunties. The whole block smelled like barbecue smoke and baked sugar. The whole block knew songs about peace on earth. Marcus yanked. The wheelchair bucked over the threshold. He shoved it into the night. The cold slapped them. Sharon gripped Zuri's shoulders from behind, bracing the chair so it wouldn't slam down the rickety porch steps. She heard herself saying the same words again and again, like a shield that didn't stop anything. "Don't touch her like that. Don't touch her like that. Don't!" Tanika's laugh floated out behind them. Marcus stood in the doorway like a judge, broad shoulders filling the frame, a shadow with a man's face. "Keys," he said. "Leave the keys." Sharon's hands shook as she unclipped the ring from the lanyard at her neck. She held it for one last second, feeling the metal press into her palm, remembering how the keys used to jingle when Marcus came home late, how Zuri would roll to the door to meet him, how he'd lift his daughter high in the early years before her diagnosis slowed her balance and her feet forgot the exact steps to walk. Then she laid the keys on the welcome mat they had bought together at a flea market, the one painted with a rooster, and the words, "May good people find this door." "Those belong to me," Sharon said. "They belong to me first," Marcus said. "I'm the one who signed the lease. Don't forget." He started to close the door, and the red angel on the tree leaned a little farther. Sharon's scalp felt tight under her scarf. She drew herself up, as tall as the wind would allow. She didn't plead anymore. She didn't ask for dignity, because dignity wasn't something you begged from a man who wouldn't see it. She looked into his eyes and said, "My father first taught me. A man who kicks his own shadow will learn the ground can fight back. This house was built on prayers. You think prayers have no hands?" Marcus blinked. For a moment, something flickered. A ghost of the boy he once was. The boy who asked Sharon to read him proverbs from her grandmother's cloth-bound book by the light of a hurricane lamp. Then he closed the door. The lock turned. The night swallowed the hallway light. Cold bled into Sharon's hands until the bones hurt. She guided the wheelchair down the steps one bounce at a time. Zuri didn't make a sound. Her lips were a careful line. The neighborhood street lights threw halos on the wet road. Somewhere a dog barked and settled. Somewhere a child squealed at a new gift they were allowed to open early. Sharon breathed the winter, and it burned. "Mom," Zuri said gently. "The blanket." Sharon whipped off her own coat and tucked it over Zuri's knees and feet. "Not my baby," she said, half to herself, half to the air. "Not in this cold." She looked up and down the street, trying to decide where to go first. The church basement was closed this week. Auntie Ngozi was at her sister's in Detroit. The shelter downtown was not a place she would put her child on Christmas Eve. "Mom," Zuri said again, softer. "I'm okay." "You are not okay," Sharon said, but it came out like a song you sing to stop crying. From behind the closed door, Tanika's voice. "Turn the music up, baby. Can't hear nothing but ghosts out there." Then laughter. Then the bass line climbed like a dare. Sharon pressed her fingers to her temple. She could feel her grandmother's voice rising in her memory, the one that always came when life turned its teeth. The old woman's Edo accent wrapped itself around English like cloth around a wrist. "When the river pushes you, child, you learn the stones by their names." And another, "A chicken does not blame the wind if it sleeps on the roof." Tonight's stones had names: betrayal, poverty, pride, fear, and something else flattening itself against the cold and refusing to move: stubborn love. Sharon touched Zuri's cheek. "We're going to the car," she said. "We will warm up, and then we will decide." "The car," Zuri said, and for the first time since the chair bumped, emotion cracked her voice. "It won't start, remember. The battery died." "And you said—" Sharon's heart dropped a stair-step. She had forgotten. Everything was slipping from her, like a grocery bag with a hole in the bottom. Before she could figure out how to fix that, a shape moved at the edge of the yard. A tall man in a long, dark coat paused under the jacaranda tree, looked once at the house, and then away. He wore a cap pulled low and carried a messenger bag. The winter had made him thin. When he turned his head, the streetlight found his face. "Uncle Bayo?" Sharon said, surprised, half with relief, half with a heat she didn't want to carry. He didn't meet her eyes. He cleared his throat. "I was just on my way," he said, voice formal the way people make it when there is too much history between them. "I heard. I thought. I wanted to make sure you were safe." "The street always spreads news faster than radio," Sharon said. He hesitated, then stepped closer, keeping a respectful space like a man approaching a frightened bird. He was her cousin by marriage, the nephew of Auntie Ngozi, the one who always fixed what needed fixing with a quiet patience. The sink, the loose fence, the computer that forgot its password. He had spent the last 2 years working nights at the hospital laundry and mornings at auto repair. He had once, told Sharon something that changed how she breathed for weeks. Then he had not said it again. "Do you need somewhere to go?" he asked. Sharon almost said yes. The word was big in her mouth, but the ache in her chest was bigger. "I don't need pity," she said. "I didn't bring pity." He touched the brim of his cap. "I brought a jump starter." In that second, Sharon wanted to cover her face with her hands and weep into the cold until it steamed. Instead, she nodded. "Help me get her to the car." They moved quickly. Zuri lifted her arms and braced as they navigated the wet grass and the curb. The world had shrunk to small movements, left hand on the armrest, right hand keeping the bag from slipping off the chair's back, foot nudging the front wheel when it snagged. Uncle Bayo set down his bag, popped the hood of the old sedan, and clipped cables in a practiced sequence. The car coughed. Sleet ticked on the windshield like tiny stones. The engine caught and held. Heat crawled into the cabin. "Thank you," Sharon said. "God will remember." Bayo's mouth twitched, then steadied. "Let me give you a ride," he said. "Anywhere you want." "Nowhere is open," Sharon said. They both looked toward the dark windows of the church down the block. There were paper snowflakes taped inside like a promise the building couldn't keep at night. The pastor had paid the light bill late again, and they all knew it. Zuri cleared her throat. "We have somewhere," she said, and her voice had a layer Sharon didn't recognize. Sharon looked down. "Baby?" Zuri glanced at the house, the very house now closed against them. The porch light flicked on. A shadow passed. She reached into the pocket of her hoodie and pulled out a folded paper wrapped with a thin red ribbon. Her hands were slow, careful, the way they were when she threaded beads into hair. "What is that?" Sharon asked. Zuri stared at the ribbon like it was a fuse she feared to light. "Grandma came to school last week, remember? For the choir program, before she got sick on Sunday. She gave Ms. Thomas something to give to me. Ms. Thomas said wait until Christmas Eve. Grandma said, 'Some proverbs are like suits. They fit when the day comes.'" Sharon remembered. She had run late that day because a customer cried in her chair, and Marcus didn't go because he said 7th graders singing "Little Drummer Boy" was not his idea of fun. Grandma Adesua had pushed Zuri's chair after the concert, steady and proud, and had kissed Sharon's cheek and said, "I am not going yet. But if I go, I have already left a lamp." Zuri untied the ribbon. The paper unfolded. Whatever it carried made Zuri's breath catch, then smooth out, like a river rounding stones it has known for 1,000 years. "What is it?" Sharon whispered. Zuri's eyes were lit by the car's dashboard glow and far-off streetlight halos. She swallowed, then handed the paper to her mother. Sharon took it with fingers that didn't feel like her own. At the top was the name of a downtown law office. There was a notary stamp. There were paragraphs of small print that Sharon's tired eyes ran past until they found the names they knew. There was a date, December 24th. There was a phrase next to a legal stamp. Warranty deed. Sharon blinked hard. She traced a line under the bold phrase, transfer of title. From Adesua Omorigi to Zuri Williams. It was signed. It was witnessed. It was real. "Grandma," Sharon breathed. "Grandma put the house in your name." Zuri nodded once. "When I asked why," she said, voice steady in a way that sounded older than 12, She said, "Because prayers are like houses. Sometimes they need a key that only a child can hold." The cold outside the car did not change. The streetlights did not flare brighter. The house did not open its arms. But the space inside the car shifted, the way a sound changes when a drum's skin is tightened. Sharon felt something lift off her chest that had been sitting there for years without a name. Bio exhaled softly. "Then you are not homeless," he said, as if stating gravity. "No," Zuri said. She folded the paper again, hands careful. "We are not." Sharon pressed her forehead to the steering wheel, then lifted it. The instinct to run to the door and bang with both fists sang through her, loud as Mahalia's highest note. But another instinct put a hand on her shoulder. Not yet. Not with anger leading. The law was a slow drum. But it could still be a song you danced to if you kept the beat. "We need proof," she said. "We need the original. We need the lawyer to—" A light flared at the end of the street. A car turned in, tires whispering on wet pavement. It stopped short in front of their driveway, hazard lights clicking. From it stepped a woman in a wool hat with a pom-pom, under a heavy coat that made her look like a child pretending to be an adult. She clutched a leather folder. Her cheeks were flushed red from the cold and from urgency. "Ms. Williams?" the woman called, voice too loud for the hour. Sharon stiffened. Bayo moved slightly in front of her by habit. Zuri rolled her chair forward 2 inches, close enough to touch her mother's sleeve. "Yes?" Sharon said through the half-open window. "I'm Denise," the woman said, breath puffing. "From Eddings and Nye, attorneys at law. I've been calling. No answer. Your grandmother said, if anything, I should find you tonight. She made me promise." The woman's hands trembled a little. "Are you Ms. Sharon Williams? Is this Zuri?" Sharon stepped out of the car into the sleet, forgetting the cold for surprise. "What happened?" she asked, though her bones already knew. An ache sailed through her and didn't dock. "I'm so sorry," Denise said, tears biting winter. "Ms. Omaregi passed just after sundown. She was very clear about this. She signed earlier. We filed copies this afternoon, but she wanted the original to be in your daughter's hands by Christmas Eve. She said, 'I want my house to be a shield that does not wait for morning.'" Denise held out the leather folder like a sacred book. In the living room behind the closed door, the radio changed songs. The angel on the tree tilted her head the other way. Marcus and Tanika's laughter swelled, then faded as somebody turned the volume down. Sharon took the folder. The paper inside felt heavier than it should have, ink and stamp and something else people older than law called oath. She looked up at the sealed door, at the brass lock that had just snubbed her, at the wreath hanging crooked because a gust had leaned on it. "Mom," Zuri said, and the steadiness in her voice made Sharon stand straighter. "We can go inside now." Bayo cleared his throat. "Do you want me to call someone?" he asked. "A police officer to keep the peace? Or the pastor? Or—" Sharon shook her head. Something was rising inside her that didn't look like rage this time. It looked like a story her grandmother used to tell. The one about the palm tree that bent for the storm, and then rose taller because the storm taught it to find the sky in a new way. She ran a hand over the folder as if it were a drumhead, tuning her heart. "Stay," she told Bayo. "Stand with us. But don't speak unless I ask." He nodded once, solemn as a witness. Sharon turned. She pushed Zuri's chair to the porch. Sleigh bells somewhere down the block rang from somebody's yard decoration. The welcome mat's rooster looked up, surprised. She knocked. Silence fell on the other side. Then footsteps. Then the door opened just enough for Marcus to stick his head out. Annoyance already rising like steam. He saw the folder. He saw the woman in the coat with the law office badge clipped to her pocket. He saw Bayo. He saw Zuri, and there was a flinch he couldn't disguise. "What now?" he said, attempting a laugh he did not feel. "You come back for the tree? The angel? You think I'm heartless?" Sharon opened the folder. She held the deed just enough for the porch light to pour over the notary's seal. "I came back for my daughter's house," she said, "and for the key you asked me to drop." The sleet slowed. Somewhere, a choir on a television sang, "Joy to the world," and their joy sounded like power. Not like paper dreams. Denise shifted from foot to foot, breath fogging. Bayo stood like a quietly carved pillar. Zuri lifted her chin. Marcus's mouth opened. He reached for his phone, because men who have learned to hold power with thumbs prefer screens to eyes. The phone lit his face blue. He blinked at whatever he saw there, frown lines rearranging. He glanced past Sharon to the street, calculating witnesses, exits, reputation. Behind him, Tanika's voice went sharp. "Who is it? Why are you letting the cold in?" He half turned, and she appeared at his shoulder like a shadow that learned to speak. She saw the folder. Her smile slipped. "What's that?" "Paper," Marcus muttered. "Nothing." But Zuri had already rolled forward, just enough to let the porch light find her face. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "Mr. Marcus," she said, using his name like a stranger would, and that alone took the fight out of the night. "Grandma gave me a Christmas gift. It has your name on it, too." Marcus's eyes finally lifted from the phone to the paper to Zuri. For a second, the wind stopped. For a second, the angel on the tree inside hung perfectly still, small wings catching quiet. "What are you talking about?" he asked, but the question came out thin, like a child pretending to be a giant. Zuri's fingers rested on the folder's edge. "She didn't just give me the house," she said. "She gave me something else, something you forgot existed. She said to tell you, tonight." Sharon felt the street shrink around them, as if the block held its breath. Denise looked at the lawyer's badge like it could give her courage. Bayo's jaw flexed once. Marcus's brows hardened. "Tell me what?" Zuri lifted her eyes and spoke a name that broke the night in two. And before anyone could answer, footsteps rang on the sidewalk, fast and sure. A second car braked at the curb, headlights bouncing off sleet. A door slammed, and a figure in a black peacoat and scarf stepped into the light, face uncovered, eyes moving from Sharon to Zuri to Marcus like counting beads in a prayer. He stopped on the bottom step, pulled off a leather glove and said, in a voice that made every sound on the street lower itself, "Who is trying to put my child out of her own house?" The porch light flared, then steadied. Tanika's hand flew to her chest. Marcus took one step back. Sharon's fingers dug into the deed so hard the paper creased. Denise gasped and almost dropped her badge. Bayo whispered a word that sounded like a prayer wrapped in surprise. Zuri's mouth was a calm line. She had expected him. She had called him. She had said his name. And Marcus. Marcus finally turned to face the one person he never expected to see on his porch on Christmas Eve. The wind rose and rattled the wreath. The door swung wider. Everything that had been true a minute ago tilted, like the angel on the tree leaning to listen. Then the new arrival lifted a single finger, as if pointing at a map only he could see, and said, "We need to talk about the day I signed that birth certificate." The world held its breath, waiting for whose truth would walk through the door first. The man on the step did not blink when the wind slapped his face. He tucked the glove into his pocket and raised his chin the way men do when they have decided they will not be moved. "Who are you?" Marcus demanded, shoulders swelling like he could block the whole porch with his frame. The man climbed one step. "Elijah Brooks," he said, "and I signed Zuri's birth certificate the day she was born." Silence came down so fast, the sleet could be heard landing on the bush by the porch. Denise from the law office pressed her lips together. Bayo glanced at Sharon, and, just for a heartbeat, at Elijah. The past stretched a thin line between the two. Sharon steadied her breath. Elijah's voice had not changed. It still carried that gravel at the bottom, like a drum that had been tuned by rain. It tugged at the part of her mind where old prayers and old anger sat next to each other and refused to blend. "Lies," Tanika said. "He's bluffing." Elijah's eyes slid to her and back to Marcus. "You put a child in the cold and call it a quiet evening," he said. "You touched a chair that carries the only daughter I will ever have, and thought no one would answer the door." Marcus scoffed, an ugly sound that made the wreath tremble. "You think you can walk up here and say anything? This is my house." Denise lifted a careful hand. "Sir, with respect. The deed—" "This is my house," Marcus repeated, louder, "because some men think, if they raise their voices, truth will flinch. I pay the bills. I sign the lease. I buy the food. You kicked them into sleet," Elijah said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "And you did it on a holy night. And now you're about to learn names you forgot. Deed, title, trespass." He turned to Zuri then, and something in him changed. The muscle in his jaw softened. His gaze warmed like a hand under cool water. "Hey, little star," he said. Zuri's lips almost curved. "Hi." Marcus's head snapped. "Little what?" Elijah did not look at him. "You called me," he told Zuri. "I came." Zuri nodded once. "Grandma said you would." "Grandma was right," Elijah said, and grief ghosted over his face, quick and sharp. He swallowed it and glanced at Sharon. "I'm sorry," he added, and the words were for more than the night. Sharon felt the apology enter the cold like heat from a small fire. She didn't pick it up yet. There were too many hands on this moment. "Show him," she told Denise. Denise stepped forward, boots squeaking on the wet mat, and held up the folder so its contents were clear. Filed at 2:47 p.m. "Today," she said, "recorded with the county clerk. Transfer of title from Ms. Adesua Omaregi to minor child Zuri Williams. Life estate retained by Ms. Omaregi until her passing at 6:12 p.m. today. Life estate now extinguished. Fee simple vested in the grantee." She took a breath. "That means the house belongs to Zuri." Marcus's laugh broke in the middle. "From the grave?" he said. "Old woman tricks, paper tricks. The lease is mine. My name's on it." "It was," Elijah said, "until the landlord sold to Ms. Omaregi last spring and converted the lease to month-to-month pending transfer. You didn't read the notices because you don't open certified mail if it looks like a bill." Marcus blinked. "What?" "Ms. Omaregi called me in May," Elijah said, finally turning to Sharon with a mix of guilt and duty. "She asked me to look at a letter from the management company. She said she wanted to make sure you and Zuri would always have a door." Sharon's chest tightened. "You never called me." "I didn't," Elijah said. "She asked me not to. She wanted to tell you with a ribbon, not with a lawyer's voice." He nodded toward the folder. "She planned this for months because she knew who she'd be fighting." Tanika scoffed. "This is foolish. I'm calling the police." She pulled out her phone, thumbs flying. "Please do," Elijah said simply. Tanika faltered. "People who reenact stories from TV do not expect the script to go this way." "Or we can keep it neighborly," Elijah added, turning to Marcus. "Give the key back, return her chair that you shoved into sleet, and step away until we can schedule a civil conversation with a mediator. You can take your coat and your pride and leave. Right now. Who do you think you are? Marcus asked. The man who will make sure you don't put a child in the cold again, Elijah said. The man whose name is on the hospital records. The man whose signature you will see again if we open a file at family court. And the man who is still trying, out of respect for a woman who cooked jollof for him the summer he learned what work is, to handle this without handcuffs. Bio's eyes flicked to Elijah, then to Sharon, then back to Elijah. You're a lawyer? Elijah shrugged like work had taught him not to brag. Public interest, he said. Mostly housing and guardianship. Some juvenile work. I read fast. I make calls other people don't want to make. The sleet thinned. The street listened. Marcus glanced behind him as if the living room could offer him a lifeline. Tanika didn't meet his eyes. Pride has a way of running when law arrives. He grabbed the keys off the mat and threw them at Sharon's feet like he was feeding chickens. Take them, he said, and his voice cracked under all the bluster. Take your little papers. You think I care? Keep the old lady house. I was leaving anyway. Tanika's head snapped his way. Excuse me? He didn't answer. He reached for the doorknob. Sharon didn't move. She didn't bend to pick up the keys, because she wouldn't give him that picture to keep in his head. Zuri rolled forward, placed a wheel gently on the ring to stop its slide, and said, We are going inside, Mr. Marcus. The Mr. stung more than any curse. Marcus opened his mouth. Then the red and blue smear of lights brushed the wet fence and the curb. 2 squad cars idled at the corner. Someone had called. Maybe Tanika. Maybe a neighbor. Maybe the street itself. The cars eased toward the house like careful animals. Doors opened. 2 officers stepped out, one older, one younger, both with the tired look of people who had planned to spend the night breaking up loud cousins and instead found law words on a porch. Evening, the older one said, hand loose near his belt, but not on it. He took in the wheelchair first, then the deed folder, then the tight faces. We got a call about a disturbance. No disturbance, Elijah replied. Just a child returning to her house. Sir, your name? The officer asked. Elijah Brooks, he said. He held up his bar card, the small white license lawyers carry like a second ID. This is Denise from Eddings and Nye, he added. She has the original deed and the recordation number. The property was transferred to minor child Zuri Williams today. Ms. Williams, he nodded to Sharon, is her mother and natural guardian. The young officer's eyebrows tilted. He glanced at Marcus. And you are? Marcus Williams, Marcus said, trying to stand taller. Relationship to the child? The older officer asked, voice neutral as a scale. Marcus paused a beat too long. Mother's husband, he said. I pay the bills. Do you have a lease? The young officer asked. Marcus lifted his chin. I signed one last year. Month to month now, Denise said, opening the folder to a copy of the management company's letter. And the lesser sold to the child's grandmother, who transferred title. This gentleman attempted a lockout without due process. He also shoved the child's wheelchair out the door. I will be filing a complaint with housing court in the morning. The officers exchanged a quick look that said, Ah, a paper night. The older one nodded slowly. All right, he said. No one is being removed tonight. It is freezing. The minor and her guardian are going inside. Everyone else, his gaze cut to Tanika, needs to lower their voices, be respectful, and not interfere. Marcus bristled. This is my house, he tried again, softer now, trying to land a punch after the bell. It's not, Elijah said. The older officer raised a palm. Sir, If you'd like to contest title, there is a court for that. It is not my squad car. You can pursue a civil claim with counsel. Tonight, we're here to make sure no one gets hurt." They stood in the cold and let the decision settle. Sleet tapped the eaves. Somewhere, a neighbor's front door opened and closed as a cousin stepped out to smoke, and then rushed back in when the cold grabbed his ear. The world kept being the world. Sharon bent very slowly and lifted the keys. They were cold enough to sting. She slid the single brass key into the lock. Her hand did not shake. She turned. It caught, then turned the rest of the way. Old metal meeting old metal like a handshake. They stepped into warmth. The house's heat hit like a blessing you forgot you had the words for. Cinnamon and smoke and pine drew circles around them. Sharon held the door for Zuri, while Bayo guided the chair over the threshold with the care of a man lifting a bride's veil. Elijah followed them 2 steps in and stopped on the mat. Marcus hovered, then drifted toward the kitchen like a ghost who couldn't decide whether to haunt or leave. Tanika clutched her phone and hovered by the tree with the red angel leaning, as if the angel had a lot to see and didn't trust her balance. Sharon stood in the living room she had picked paint for and felt like a stranger who had been invited back by prayers. The decorations looked different. Cheap tinsel she had never bought had found the mantel, and the stockings she had sewn with Zuri were crumpled on the floor like clothes after a fight. A wine-glass ring marked the coffee table she had sanded with her own hands. She breathed once, twice. Then she moved to the tree, lifted the crumpled stockings, shook them out, and hung them back on the hooks. She smoothed the fabric with her palm and said nothing. Sometimes a house needs to hear your hands speak before your mouth does. Zuri rolled to the corner where her keyboard sat under a thin film of dust. She touched a key. The note was flat, then true. As her ear adjusted, she pressed another and another, until a small, careful chord filled the air like a lantern being lit. Elijah watched her, something in his face unguarded for the first time in years. "Zuri," Sharon said, still smoothing stockings. "Why did you call him?" "Because Grandma said the key is a child's hand," Zuri replied. "And also because he knows the language Marcus doesn't." "What language is that?" Marcus snapped from the kitchen, unable to keep silent. "Care," Zuri said plainly. Silence moved into the room like a visitor who intends to stay until morning. The older officer poked his head in, tipped his hat in a small nod to Sharon, and said, "We'll be out front for 5 minutes and then gone. If anyone starts anything, call." He looked at Zuri, and his face softened into the expression of a father who wants to do better. "Merry Christmas, young lady." "Thank you," Zuri said. They left. The door shut. The house exhaled. Elijah slid his other glove into his pocket and stepped closer to the keyboard. "You've been practicing," he said. "Ms. Thomas says I can hear the note before I press it," Zuri said. "Like I already know where it wants to go." Sharon looked from her daughter to Elijah, and a picture rose unbidden. That hospital room 12 years ago in late spring, the window full of tree branches and sun, Elijah younger and scared and stubborn, asking the nurse twice how to spell the name they had picked, Zuri, because he wanted to write it right on the first try. He had signed, hand shaking a little, lower lip caught between teeth, like a boy doing a torch's job. Then he had kissed Sharon's forehead and said, "I will stand where I should." And then life had knocked him sideways. The memory opened a door in her mind, and the room behind it was the old backstory they never told together. It unrolled now, like a cloth that had been folded too long. There was a bus stop on 117th and Brook. There was a girl with braids and cracked knuckles from sweeping hair on Saturdays, and a boy with a backpack full of napkins he had drawn dreams on. They met waiting for the bus. That year the school closed for 2 weeks because the pipes burst. They shared a meat pie and laughed at the same joke at the same time. The laughter stuck like a ribbon. They learned each other's rhythms, how to count tips in their head, how to cook rice without looking, how to pretend they weren't scared of the rent. They tried to be careful and failed once in a way that changed calendars. When the blue line turned pink and the world tilted, they were 18 and proud. Elijah said, "I'll find 2 jobs," and did. Sharon said, "I'll finish my hours at the salon," and did. They braided time and hope and sleep into something sturdy. Then Elijah's mother got sick in Atlanta. He left for 6 weeks that turned into 10 because the hospital ate hours like hungry dogs. He called and called until his phone died and his charger broke, and his boss said if he didn't come back, he didn't have a job. When he came back, Marcus had shown up with a bucket of chicken and a smile that said, "I can fix your tired." Marcus had known Sharon since they were kids in the same pew. He knew which hymn made her cry and which auntie's side-eye she avoided. He came by when Elijah was gone and carried a box without being asked. He said, "You shouldn't carry everything alone." He made himself available. He loaned a car. He asked about the baby's kicks. He looked at Elijah with a respect that felt like a trick and said, "Brother, tell me where to help," and then helped in the wrong places, the ones that make people fight. When Zuri was born, Elijah held her before Marcus did. He signed first because he was there first. He signed because he meant it. He told Sharon they would get married when they could afford a ring that wasn't 2 jobs and a promise. But money is a loud voice, and pride is louder. Elijah took a contract in another state because the pay was double. He said, 2 months. It stretched. The car broke in Memphis. He slept in it and didn't tell her. He missed 2 calls, and then the third. Sharon, alone with a baby and a boss who wanted Christmas braids to be perfect, called Marcus to fix a leak Elijah should have fixed. Marcus did it with a grin and a tire iron and words that slipped into the cracks like oil. By the time Elijah found his way back with a beat-up sedan and $2,700, Marcus had moved in just until you get back. Tempers flashed. Words were said you cannot sweep back into your throat. Elijah looked at the baby and said, "She is mine." And Marcus said, "She is ours." And Sharon said nothing, because choices piled at her feet like shoes, and none of them fit right when she was this tired. The 3 of them tried to build a table. It wobbled. It finally broke. Elijah put his hands up and stepped back, because he feared what anger would make of him if he stayed another hour. He told himself he would return with a better plan and a calmer mouth. Plans change. People do, too. Years folded. Calls grew fewer. Sharon married Marcus in a September that smelled like dusty church fans and the last mangoes. Elijah stopped calling when he heard the vows. He didn't come around except at holidays when the pull was stronger than his pride. He stood at the back and sent money in a card addressed to Zuri with a drawing of a star in the corner. He signed his first name and sometimes just drew the star. Zuri grew. She sang early. She tripped more than other kids. She learned to laugh at the floor, then to grab the chair when the floor would not cooperate. The doctors used long words. Sharon hated the words, but loved how they made other people gentle. Elijah sat in on a televisit once, just a tiny square on a screen, eyes wet when Zuri explained her ankle braces like a scientist explains the moon. He said, "Star, You shine different. That doesn't make you less sky. She saved the recording and listened when nights got long. Grandma Adesua watched everything with eyes that had seen harm come and go like weather. She cooked and prayed and saved small bills in a tin behind the flour. She told proverbs that rolled like marbles under the couch until someone found them with their toes. She said, "When the rain finishes, the ground remembers which feet stood there." She made a plan long before Sharon knew what plan she was making. Back in the living room, the past folded itself neatly and slid back into the drawer. The present sharpened. Elijah reached into his coat and pulled out a thin envelope. "Zuri," he said, "I brought this when Grandma first called me in May, and I've carried it since. I thought it was for later." "Maybe later is tonight." He handed it to her. Zuri opened it with the same care she had used on the ribbon. Inside lay a photocopy of a birth certificate, a letter from the hospital confirming paternity, and a copy of a court order from years ago. An acknowledgement of parentage recorded 2 days after she was born. It had Elijah's signature and the nurse's messy cursive. It had Zuri's clean baby footprint. Marcus stared at it like it was a language he never learned to read. Elijah looked at Sharon. "I kept out of your marriage," he said. "I stayed away because I thought it would make things simpler for you. I am sorry for where that silence left you uncovered, but tonight isn't about old fights. It's about where this child sleeps." He turned to Marcus again. "If you try this again, I will not be polite. I will bring the law like a storm." Marcus took a step forward, face tightening. "You think you can threaten me in my—" The oven timer beeped. The sound cut through everything, small, ordinary, the same beeping that meant cornbread was ready or burned. Sharon lunged for the kitchen, grabbed the mitt, pulled open the door. Smoke fanned. The mac and cheese had gone brown at the edges. The jollof had crusted in a way her cousins loved. She set both on the stovetop with a thump that sounded like the night landing. She stared at the food. Food that had been for a family that didn't look like this 10 minutes ago. Food that would not go to waste because, in her house, even on a torn night, people ate. "Sit," she said to Zuri. "We will eat and think. We will not make blood sugar our enemy as well." Zuri smiled without showing teeth. "Yes, ma'am." Elijah stood awkward at the door to the kitchen, like a man who moved out of a house and forgot how the spoons are arranged. Bayo washed his hands at the sink and started setting plates like his mother had trained him. Large on the bottom, small on top, fork left, knife right, napkin folded neat. Denise hovered, then stepped back to the hall. "I should go," she whispered to Sharon. "I'll email scanned copies tonight. I'm sorry about your grandmother. She was fierce." "She was," Sharon said, and her eyes burned in a way that had nothing to do with oven heat. "Thank you for keeping your promise." Denise nodded and slipped out into the night, pulling her hat down over her ears. The door shut like a soft full stop. Marcus didn't sit. He paced. The way men pace when their idea of themselves is cracking and they can hear the crack. He ran his hand over his head. He stared at Tanika as if she had a solution in her coat pocket. Tanika stared back, mouth tight. "Let's not be foolish," Tanika whispered. "Let's leave." "I'm not leaving my own," he began, then stopped because the word house tasted wrong now. Sharon served Zuri first, small comfort she refused to let the night steal. She moved with the grace of women who have had to move with grace when grace was not given to them. Elijah leaned on the doorway and watched like a man who had walked a long way and found a porch light. "Eat," Sharon told him without looking up. "You came when you were called. People who come when they are called get food in this house." "Yes, ma'am," Elijah said. And the ma'am was not a joke. They ate. The first bites turned the volume down on the shaking inside their bodies. The house settled in small snaps and ticks as warm fought cold. The radio went back to Mahalia. Her voice found the corners and dusted them. Marcus stopped pacing. He stood still, eyes unfocused the way people get when the future they planned has to turn left without warning. He pulled his phone out again. He swiped hard, his face drained. "What?" Tanika asked. He didn't answer. He swiped more, tapped, cursed under his breath. "What?" she repeated, claws in her voice now. "My bank," he said finally. This says, account restricted, fraud hold." Elijah did not smile. He didn't have to. "Ms. Omaregi put you on notice 6 months ago," he said. "When you tried to borrow against equity, that wasn't yours. She filed a fraud alert. When you tried again last week, the bank flagged your name. They do that now. They are slow until they are not." Marcus's head jerked. You set me up." "You set yourself up when you took out a payday loan in the house's address and signed a name that wasn't yours," Elijah said, words flat and heavy. "That company called the law office this afternoon after Ms. Omaregi's filing hit the county site. They sent documents. Denise forwarded them. I forwarded them again. Enjoy your emails." Marcus's mouth opened and then shut. He had run out of script. Sharon Spoon paused. This was new. She looked at Elijah. "You knew?" she asked. Elijah's face softened. "I didn't know until today," he said. "I spent the afternoon with a fax machine like it was 1998. Because Denise's scanner broke. I drove with lights off in the back roads to make it here fast enough to be more help than a voicemail. I would have been here sooner if—" He stopped, swallowed. "If I hadn't gone to the hospital first." Sharon's hand tightened around the spoon. "Was she—" The sentence could not finish. It didn't have to. "She was still warm," Elijah said quietly. "She said your name twice. She said Zuri's 3 times. She told me a proverb I didn't understand then." He took a breath that made his shoulders shake once. She said, "Tell Sharon the river will return with what it took if she waits at the right bend." Then she smiled. Then she slept. The room went thin and bright. Zuri's fingers found the keyboard again and pressed a single key so gentle it was almost a breath. The note hovered and then dissolved. Sharon pressed her lips together. Tears came and didn't fall. She set the spoon down because hands that shake should not hold hot plates. "I will go sit for a minute," she said to no one in particular, and then to everyone. "Zuri, eat. Elijah, eat. Bayo, please take the door key and put it on the hook. Tanika," she turned, and her voice did not lose its evenness. "Tanika, if you have a home to go to, I think this is the hour to return to it." Tanika held Sharon's gaze for 3 beats, found nothing she could bruise there, grabbed her red coat, and headed for the door without a word. She paused, looked at Marcus as if expecting him to follow, and when he didn't move, she left hard, the door thumping behind her an inch louder than it needed to. Sharon stepped into the small bedroom down the hall, where the quilt her grandmother sewed lay smoothed and neat. She shut the door softly and leaned her head against it. The room smelled like cedar from the chest by the window, and lavender from the sachet of dried flowers Grandma tucked into her pillowcase. She let herself cry then, short and sharp, like the body releasing a knot that had been shivering for hours. She pressed her face into the quilt and said thank you to a woman who had prepared a shield and a lamp and a proverb that made a door in a storm. She was still breathing when she heard the front door open and close softly. Footsteps shuffled. Voices dropped. She wiped her face and stepped back into the light. She found Elijah standing by the tree, fingers on the angel, straightening it so it leaned less. "Don't," she said, and he froze. "Leave her like that tonight." She nodded at the angel. "She's listening." Elijah's hand fell. "Yes," he said, "she is." Marcus sat on the couch, shoulders rounded, phone in his lap like a heavy fruit he couldn't figure out how to eat anymore. He looked 10 years older than he had an hour ago. Zuri rolled to the center of the room, set both hands on her wheels, and turned to face him. "Mr. Marcus," she said, "you will not speak harsh to my mother again. You will not speak to me like I'm weight. If you want to be in this house, you will ask." With words that are kind. Marcus stared at her as if a child had grown a crown while he wasn't looking. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He started, then stopped, as if a new language had to be learned just to finish one sentence. His phone vibrated. He flinched. He looked down. The name on the screen made his face drain further. He stood, held up a hand as if to quiet a room that didn't belong to him, and answered. "Hello," he said. He listened. His eyes flicked to Elijah, to Sharon, to Zuri, to the floor. The voice on the other end was loud enough that everyone in the room could hear. Tinny and hot like a kettle about to scream. "Marcus Darnell Williams," the voice said. "You better explain why there's a detective at my door with questions about forged signatures." It was his cousin, Tanya. She worked at the title office. She knew everyone and everything about paper in this neighborhood. She did not call at night unless the paper was on fire. "What are you talking about?" Marcus said, but his voice was thin. "Don't play dumb with me," Tanya snapped. "That cash buyer you tried to pull in this morning sent your agreement to the recorder to rush a pre-clear, and your signature don't match the lease. And your notary stamp expired in 2019. The detective says he's coming to you next. He already called your bank. You better be home or be on your knees in a church, because you're going to need both a lawyer and a prayer." Everyone looked at Elijah at the same time. He didn't smile then, either. He looked tired, like a man who knows the next hour will be long. Marcus swallowed air like it hurt. "Tanya," he said, listen." "Don't cuz me," Tanya said. "And don't come to my house, and don't bring that woman." The line clicked dead. The room held still. The red angel tilted her head, not to listen now, but like she had heard enough. Marcus lowered the phone like it weighed brick. He looked at Sharon with a mix of shame and anger that people wear when they know they started the fire and still want to blame the matches. He looked at Zuri and flinched. He looked at Elijah and found no footing there. He took 3 steps toward the door, then stopped. He turned back, eyes narrow, as if he had just remembered a card he could play. "You got paper, Elijah," he said, voice low. "You got your little lawyer speech, but you forgot something." He pointed at Zuri, and Sharon moved an inch forward before she could stop herself. "You forgot the clinic bill. You forgot the hospital payment plan I set up. You forgot the van I co-signed. The debt has my name on it, and debt follows title, right? You think you can just take the house and not the bill? Good luck." Elijah's eyes stayed steady. "Medical debt doesn't attach to real property in this state, unless it's a lien," he said. "No lien was filed. I checked." He paused. "But I didn't forget anything." Marcus smirked. "You sure?" Elijah nodded once. "Yes." He reached into his coat one more time and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, fresh creases across crisp white. He unfolded it on the coffee table. The notary's stamp gleamed. Because while I was at the hospital before I left, I signed something else at Ms. Omoregi's request. He touched the header with one finger. Temporary guardianship papers for Zuri, effective upon the court's approval. Filed electronically 1 hour ago. Hearing set for the morning after Christmas. Sharon's breath caught. Elijah, she whispered, half warning, half relief. It is temporary, he said, voice gentle now to her. Not to take anything from you, to add a shield, because the world is about to come loud, and I wanted my name between you and the noise. If you say no, I'll withdraw it, and we'll find another path. But for tonight, it is a wall we can lean on. Sharon opened her mouth to answer, and the front door flew open before anyone could move. 2 men in puffy coats, hoods up, faces raw from cold, stepped into the living room like they'd been invited. One held a manila envelope thick with paper. The other held nothing and scanned the room with quick, hungry eyes that knew living rooms too well. Marcus Williams, the man with the envelope said, "We're from Lakeside Home Buyers. You signed a contract today. We're here to get a walkthrough before we take possession at 9 a.m. Elijah straightened. Sharon stepped in front of Zuri's chair. Bayo's hand went to the counter where a rolling pin lay. Marcus took a step back, color draining so fast it looked like the night had pulled it out of him. "You need to leave," Elijah said, quiet but wrapped in steel. The man with the envelope smirked and slapped the paper with his palm. "We got contracts," he said. "We got a cashier's check. We got—" "You have fraud," Elijah said. "And if you do not put that envelope down and leave this house now, you will also have a pair of handcuffs." The second man's eyes slid to Zuri, to the folder, to the angel, to the stove with mac and cheese, like he was cataloging the story. He shifted, uneasy. "Man, let's go," he muttered. The first man shook his head. "Not without—" He stopped because a voice from the doorway cut through his chest. "Is there a problem here?" The older officer had stepped back in, hand not on his weapon but near it, because that is where hands go when rooms get tight. Blue light washed the entry. The man with the envelope looked at the badge, at Elijah's bar card, at Sharon's face, at Zuri's steady eyes, and made his choice. He shoved the envelope toward Marcus like a hot plate. "You deal with it," he snapped, and backed out of the door so fast the wreath swung. They were gone before the room could change shape again. The officer looked at Marcus. "Do we need to have a different kind of talk?" he asked. Marcus sagged. The fight, for the moment, went out of him like air from a tire. "No," he muttered. "No more talk tonight." He moved toward the hall as if to gather a bag. He paused, turned, and let anger reach for one more match. "You think this is over?" he said, voice low. Elijah's answer was quieter still. "I think Christmas is not a night for war in a child's living room," he said, "and I think tomorrow belongs to people who have the law and the truth. Go. Sleep somewhere else. Come back when you have an apology and a lawyer." Marcus stared one long beat. Then he disappeared down the hallway. Sharon exhaled. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. She looked at Elijah, at Bayo, at Zuri, at the angel leaning like a gossip who had finally been satisfied for the night. She had not taken 2 steps toward the couch when Marcus came back. He wasn't carrying a bag. He was carrying a small fireproof safe. Sharon's heart stumbled. That safe had lived in their closet for 5 years. She kept birth certificates and Zuri's school evaluations in it. She kept Grandma's old letters. She had lost the key last month and meant to ask Grandma for the spare. "What are you doing?" she asked, voice steady only because she made it be. Marcus held the safe high like a trophy. "You want paper?" he said. "You think paper is power?" He moved toward the kitchen sink as if to drop it, as if to twist the tap, as if to drown a history. Before anyone could move, he snapped the safe open. The key, Grandma's spare, hung from the lock like a small silver tongue. He reached inside. He pulled out a thin, hardback book, cloth-bound, frayed at the corners. It was Grandma Adeswa's proverb book. He held it up between two fingers. And a folded photograph slid out and landed face up on the floor. Elijah sucked in breath so hard it hurt. Sharon stared. The picture was old and glossy, edges worn. It showed a hospital room, a newborn, a tired, glowing Sharon, and two young men on either side of her, both with hands on the blanket, both looking at the baby like the world had just been remade. But there was a third figure in the corner of the shot, a reflection in the window glass behind them. A man with Marcus's jawline, a man whose face Sharon knew, but not for this reason. And wrapped around his wrist in the reflection was a hospital band, the kind only a parent wears on delivery day. Elijah knelt, picked up the photo, turned it gently. On the back, in Grandma's careful hand, were 4 words and a date. 2 fathers, 1 truth, 0514. The room tilted. Elijah looked up, eyes wide in a way Sharon had never seen. "Sharon," he said, voice gone thin. "Who else was there that day?" Marcus smiled, a slow, dangerous smile that did not belong to a man who was losing. And the old house, which had kept its secrets quiet under cinnamon and smoke for 12 years, lifted one more corner of the cloth and showed the room a truth none of them had told yet. No one moved. The safe hung in Marcus's hands like a threat and a confession. The cloth-bound book, Grandma Adeswa's, rested in his other palm, pages fanned, the photograph winking on the floor like a coin heads up. Elijah rose slowly, palms open. "Put the book down," he said. "Please." Marcus's mouth kept that small, dangerous curve. "Why?" he asked softly. "So you can read my life into a villain story?" He flicked the photo with his shoe. "2 fathers, 1 truth," he quoted, mocking the neat script. "What truth is that?" "Sharon." Sharon stepped forward before her voice could decide to tremble. "The truth that a child is not a weapon," she said. "The truth that paper is not a trick, but a story written straight." Elijah crouched and lifted the photograph like it might break if he breathed too hard. He held it under the lamp. "That band," he murmured, "only parents wear them." "Or someone who told the nurse he was one," Sharon said, and felt heat rise in her cheeks. A heat from 12 years ago she had buried so deep she forgot where the ground swallowed it. "The day Zuri came, the nurse handed me 2 bands," she continued, keeping her eyes on the book. Not on Marcus. She said, "Father and Mother." Elijah put his on. "And you." She looked up then. The words a stone she had to throw. "True. You took the 2nd band, Marcus. You told the nurse I needed someone to keep me steady if Elijah fainted. You laughed. She thought it was a joke. She put it on you anyway." Marcus shrugged. "You were alone a lot," he said. "Someone had to keep you steady." Elijah stared at him, as if looking from far enough away would make the picture fit. "You signed nothing," he said. "But he stood in the picture," Sharon said. "And Grandma saw the reflection and wrote a warning where I wouldn't miss it if the day ever came." Zuri wheeled closer, her chair's front casters whispering on the rug. "Grandma never wasted ink," she said. "If she wrote it, it mattered." Elijah slid the photograph back onto the coffee table and reached for the proverb book in Marcus's hand. Marcus jerked it away, but not fast enough to stop the small crack of paper tucked in the spine from slipping loose and fluttering like a moth toward the floor. Bio, quick, caught it. He didn't open it. He handed it to Sharon. Her name was on the outside in Grandma's careful hand. Beneath it, a second name, Zuri. Sharon broke the seal like she was waking someone who had been sleeping too long. Inside, folded with the exactness of a woman who ironed linens on Saturdays, were three things: a notarized letter on hospital letterhead, dated 12 years back, a lab result on simple white paper from 3 years after Zuri's birth, and a third note on lined stationery that smelled faintly of lavender and wood smoke. Sharon read the hospital letter first. The nurse's note, brief and neat. This is to memorialize that on 0514, Mother Sharon Williams declined to add Marcus Williams to birth certificate. Present were Sharon Williams and Elijah Brooks, who signed the voluntary acknowledgement of parentage. A second band was mistakenly issued to Marcus Williams as support person, corrected in file. She passed it to Elijah. Marcus's mouth twitched, then hardened. Sharon read the second sheet, the lab result, slower. Her eyes ran twice over the black and white lines until the words stopped swimming. Probability of paternity, 99.997%, it said under Elijah's name. At the bottom, scrawled in Grandma's hand, for Sharon, if the day turns crooked. Sharon's throat closed. She pressed the paper to her chest for a heartbeat, and then set it on the table. Flat, where no one could pretend it had not been seen. The third note, Grandma's, was short and without law words, the way people talk when the truth fits in a proverb better than a paragraph. Child, it read, if thunder comes to your door, say this: a lie is a canoe. It floats until the river wants a stone. Do not fear the water. It knows your name. Sharon folded the note and put it in the pocket over her heart. Enough, Marcus said, but he was arguing with paper now, and paper had a way of winning when truth stood behind it. Elijah lifted his eyes to Marcus. Put the book down, he repeated. There was no please this time. You don't want to be the man who tears a grandmother's words. Marcus's fingers tightened. He looked like a man trying to squeeze water out of wood. Then, with a scoff that broke in the middle, he tossed the book onto the couch. It landed beside the photo, beside the copy of the deed, beside the hospital letter. Like all the nights that had led to this, one had taken their seats and were waiting to see what the next line in the play would be. Sharon picked up the proverb book with both hands, smoothing the frayed edges. For a breath, her mind traveled not to law and locks and narrow voices, but to Grandma's kitchen. To afternoons when oil popped in the pan, and the sound of stories was the sound of onions softening. When the hawk does not fly, does the sky collapse? Grandma had asked once, half-smile tucked into her cheek. No, it waits. It keeps being the sky. A knock sounded, not the sharp, impatient rap of the men with contracts, not the heavy police knuckle. A professional knock, 3 even taps, a pause, then 2. Elijah's shoulders went tight. He glanced at the door, then at Sharon. Did you call anyone else? No, Sharon said. The older officer who had lingered on the porch opened the door a crack with a practiced caution and looked back over his shoulder. You expecting CPS? He asked. Sharon felt the floor tilt. No. A woman stepped into the frame, slim in a sensible coat, wool hat, clipboard held like a shield. Her badge hung on a lanyard, Child Protective Services. Good evening, she said, looking from face to face, her gaze professional but not unkind. I'm Ms. Ortega, on-call caseworker. We received an anonymous report of neglect and unsafe conditions for a minor with mobility needs at this address. Normally, I would not come this late, but the report mentioned exposure to cold, a physical altercation, and an attempted eviction. Elijah's jaw worked. He didn't look at Marcus. He didn't need to. Sharon's hand found Zuri's shoulder. "She is safe," she said, steady. "She is home." "We'll get there," Ms. Ortega said gently, tone softening as she clocked the wheelchair, the food on the stove, the angel on the tree that leaned as if trying to hear the right thing. "I still need to see the child, speak to the guardian, and assess the environment. It's policy." "Elijah Brooks," Elijah said, stepping forward with his bar card like it could part a sea. "I'm counsel." Temporary guardianship paperwork was filed electronically an hour ago at the request of the maternal grandmother, now deceased. Hearing set for the first business day after Christmas. Biological mother, Sharon Williams, is present. The child is safe. There is no immediate danger. Ms. Ortega's eyes flicked to the bar card, then to Sharon. "Miss Williams?" "Yes," Sharon said. "And this is your daughter?" "Zuri," Sharon said. 12. Zuri lifted a hand. "Hello?" Ms. Ortega's gaze, trained by years of hard nights, took in the blanket over Zuri's legs, the way her hands were warm, the faint steam still curling from her plate. The smell of not-burned food, the presence of Law with eyes like someone who sleeps less than he should. She nodded once, but didn't put her clipboard down. "Who called?" Elijah asked, voice low. He didn't need the answer to know it. He wanted it for the record. "I can't say," Ms. Ortega replied. "Anonymous." "Anonymous is not always a stranger," Bio said, and the proverb in his mouth was not from a book, but from a mother who worked 2 jobs and taught him how people keep themselves safe. "I still have to ask hard questions," Ms. Ortega said. "Ask," Sharon replied. "I do not hide truth." Ms. Maidfee Funky Ortega stepped in fully and closed the door against the sleet. She clicked her pen. "Was the child expelled from the house in inclement weather tonight?" "Yes," Sharon said, before Elijah could speak for her. "By my husband. He is in the house now because the police prevented him from committing further harm while we sort legal status. The house belongs to my daughter. We have the deed." She gestured to the coffee table, where paper sat like small, stubborn mountains. Ms. Ortega blinked. "The house is in the child's name?" she asked, quick professional surprise adjusting the questions in her head. "Transferred today by the child's grandmother," Elijah said. "We have the recorded instrument and the clerk's number." "And the child's legal father?" Ms. Ortega asked. "Present," Elijah said, with a touch of a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He handed her the photocopy of the birth certificate. "Acknowledged at birth. DNA test, if you need redundancy." Ms. Ortega took in the papers like a woman reading a road that had detoured but still got you there. "All right," she said. "Mr. Williams?" She looked at Marcus. He lifted his chin half an inch. "Mother's husband," he said, and the 3 words felt like a suit that didn't fit right anymore. Ms. Ortega nodded. "I'll need to see the child's room," she said to Sharon, "and speak to her alone. It won't be long." Sharon hesitated, not because there was anything to hide, because the night had already asked her to open so many doors. Then she nodded. "Zuri?" she asked. "It's okay, Mom," Zuri said. "I know the answers." They rolled down the hall. Elijah stayed in the living room with Bio and the officer and Marcus, whose eyes followed the caseworker like a man watching a tide he hadn't counted on. As they disappeared, Elijah turned to Marcus. "You called CPS," he said. Not a question. Marcus's shrug was an ugly thing. "I called somebody," he said. "If y'all want to play paper, I can play too." "You called the people who take children," Elijah said, voice flat. "I called the people who protect them," Marcus snapped, as if he could rearrange the world by arguing with his own echo. Elijah looked toward the hall. "She will see through it," he said. "Truth doesn't hide in this house anymore." "Truth," Marcus repeated, and his eyes shifted to the safe at his feet, a thought moving across his face like a shadow under fast clouds. "Since we tellin' the truth," he bent, flipped the safe's lid again, and plunged his hand inside. "Marcus," Sharon said from the hall, hearing the metal, voice slicing the air like a knife that knows where to go. "Leave my mother's things." He pulled his hand out anyway, triumph in the line of his mouth. He held an envelope stuffed thick, rubber-banded, the color of money that has whispered under too many tables. He tossed it on the coffee table. It landed with a slap that made the angel wiggle. "Caregiver stipends," he said, savoring the words like something sour he had decided to pretend was sweet. "Back pay. 3 years. You think y'all the only ones who can do papers?" Silence pressed the room flat for a beat. Elijah didn't reach for the envelope. He wanted to. He held himself still. "You signed her name," he said. Marcus's smile widened. "They pay the one who applies," he said. "You welcome." Sharon's breath left her like a door closing. She stepped forward, took the envelope, and flipped through. The stubs, photocopies of checks, deposit slips, bore her forged signature in a hand that mimicked her loops, without understanding how her S-curves dipped. The memo lines said in-home support, mobility aid, respite, transportation, like a list of mercies that had walked past her because someone else stood at the door and said her name. She put the envelope down as if it were hot. "You took what was meant to help her," she said. "It wasn't a question." Marcus looked at the window, at the angel, anywhere but at the child in the chair. "I bought food," he muttered. "I paid bills." "You tried to sell her house today," Elijah said. Bio's fingers flexed once on the back of a chair. The officer in the doorway shifted his weight and said nothing, because sometimes the best thing a uniform can do is be a quiet witness until the room tells the truth against itself. Down the hall, Ms. Ortega's gentle voice floated back. "Do you ever feel unsafe at home, Zuri?" Zuri's answer was clear. "I felt unsafe tonight." "Before tonight?" A pause. "Sometimes when Mr. Marcus gets loud." "Has he ever touched you in a way that made you feel—" "No," Zuri cut in. "He doesn't touch me like that." The next words came level as a ruler. "But he threw my chair." In the living room, the officer's jaw tightened. Ms. Ortega's voice softened more. "Do you have another safe adult who can be with you if your mother needs help?" "Yes," Zuri said. "My Uncle Bio. And my dad." Her voice didn't trip on the last word. Elijah's knuckles whitened where they rested on the back of a dining chair. He didn't move. He didn't allow himself a breath big enough to be a sob. Ms. Ortega appeared a minute later, Zuri rolling next to her. The caseworker's face was still professional, but warmer now, less storm, more steady rain. "I've seen enough for tonight," she said gently. "Ms. Williams, Mr. Brooks, the home is safe. The child is fed, warm, and in the presence of responsible adults. There is clear documentation of an attempted illegal eviction and potential financial exploitation by the mother's husband." Her eyes flicked to Marcus, and the word husband sounded like it had a question mark built into it now. "I will file my report. There will be a follow-up, but I see no cause for removal." Sharon closed her eyes for the length of one breath. "Thank you," she said. It came out like a prayer wearing shoes. Marcus laughed once, harsh. "You people think paper can tell a story." He kicked the safe with his boot so it clanged. "You forgot I know other stories." He jabbed a finger toward Zuri. You forgot she fell out that van last year when the ramp stuck. And who carried her? I did. Where were you then, Mr. Lawyer? Where was Grandma then, huh? Sharon's hand tightened on the back of Zuri's chair. The memory rose sharp and unwelcome. The ramp sticking. The jolt. Zuri's arm grazed, the scrape that took too long to heal because her circulation was slow. The ER. Marcus's accidents happen, said, like a period, not a plea. Ms. Ortega nodded once, processing, not alarmed. Accidents do happen, she said evenly. We'll document and move forward. Marcus's smile went cutting. Document this, he said, and reached again into the safe, deeper this time, fingers catching something hidden at the bottom, taped under the lip like a secret. He pulled out a small black device, sleek, a little lens winking. Bayo stepped forward before anyone else. What is that? Marcus's smile sharpened. Insurance, he said. He clicked a side button. A blue light came on. HD camera, he added. You think tonight is the first time I thought about staying safe? Elijah's eyes narrowed. You taped them, he said quietly. Marcus waggled the camera between two fingers. You'd be surprised what people say when they think the house is only listening. Two fathers, right? He tilted the lens toward Elijah. Maybe I got audio of you admitting things you wish you hadn't. Elijah didn't blink. Play it, he said. No, Zuri said, sudden and sharp as a dropped plate. Everyone looked at her. She rolled forward, shoulders squared, hands steady on her wheels. She looked at the camera, then at Marcus, then at the book on the couch, at the photo, at the envelope of stolen stipends, at the officer with kind eyes trying not to look like he wanted to shake his head, at Ms. Ortega, whose pen had paused in mid-air, at Elijah, who stood like a door that wanted to be a wall if the house asked. No, Zuri repeated, calmer now, like she'd chosen the note. We don't have to listen to a lie to know what the truth sounds like. She turned to Ms. Ortega. I want to say something for your paper. Go ahead, Ms. Ortega said. Zuri inhaled. When she spoke, she did it with Grandma's cadence, with Grandma's language tucked inside English like a hand inside a warm glove. A proverb is a mirror, she said, eyes on Marcus, the way a weather vane faces wind. It shows a fool his face if he dares to look. Mr. Marcus, look. Marcus's jaw flexed. For a heartbeat, the room throbbed with something more than anger. Shame, maybe, or the itch of a conscience trying to remember its job. He lifted the camera higher, thumb over the button. The older officer took one small step forward, not a threat, a reminder. Sir, he said, in that tired tone good cops learn, don't make tonight worse. And that's when the front door, which had finally found a quiet hinge, flew open hard enough to rattle the angel. Tanika stumbled back in, hair askew, coat half on, half off, cheeks blotched with a cold that looked like crying. Marcus, she blurted, ignoring everyone else. The detective is on the street. 2 cars. He went by my mama's. Tanya called me. He's coming here with a warrant. She stopped, because the room had gone still as a held breath. Marcus's bravado cracked. The camera dipped. Sirens wailed 2 blocks over and grew louder. Not a scream, a certainty. Elijah didn't move. Sharon didn't either. Ms. Ortega, professional to the bone, tucked her clipboard under her arm and whispered to Zuri, "Stay by your mother." The officer at the door lifted his radio. Marcus's eyes found the window, the back hall, escape routes that had felt like options an hour ago and now looked like small drawings in a child's maze. He did not run. He did something worse. He reached for Zuri's chair. His fingers latched around the handle like a man grabbing a suitcase he thinks is his. "Don't," Sharon said, but the word came too late to stop the first tug. Elijah moved, fast and clean, one hand on the chair, the other on Marcus's wrist, not hurting, locking. "Let go," he said, steady. And in the second between tug and release, something happened no one in that room expected. Zuri's hands left the wheels. She planted them on the armrests, leaned forward, and pushed. Her legs, which did not always listen, heard something in the room that cut through fear. She rose. It was not a full, easy stand. It was a quiver, a boy's first step into the ocean, a girl's first note when her throat is dry. But she rose, 1 inch, 2, and her knees unlocked and argued, and then agreed for the length of one heartbeat. "Stop," she said, loud enough to make the angel stop leaning and listen. Marcus froze. Zuri's feet touched down again, like birds that had decided the branch was strong enough. She lowered herself back, breath coming fast, eyes bright, mouth set. No one spoke for a full count of 5. Then the sirens arrived at the curb, red-blue painting the lace curtains like a question the house would have to answer. The detective's knock, sharp, certain, shook the wood. "Marcus Darnell Williams," a voice called, carrying clearly through the winter. "Open up. We have a warrant." Sharon's hand found Zuri's. Elijah's hand found the back of the chair. Bio's hand found the deadbolt. The angel on the tree leaned, listening hard. And somewhere beneath the floorboards of the old house, a proverb shifted its weight, ready to stand up and speak names. The knock came again, measured, official, while the red and blue glow washed the lace curtains like a warning. Bio slid the deadbolt, and the door eased open to a tall detective in a dark peacoat and knit cap. His beard was salted, his eyes clear, not cold, just the eyes of a man who had looked into too many rooms and learned to tell the difference between noise and harm. "Detective Harrell," he said, flashing a shield. He nodded to the uniformed officer already inside, to Ms. Ortega with her clipboard, to Elijah with his bar card, and finally to Sharon and Zuri. "Evening. I know it's late. I'm sorry for that." His tone said he wasn't sorry about timing, only about the part of his job that put him at doors on holidays. Marcus stood by the couch, the small black camera dangling from his fingers. Tanika hovered at the threshold, coat half on, eyes wide. Detective Harrell glanced once at the safe on the rug, the envelope of caregiver stipends, the deed with the clerk's stamp. He took in the wheelchair, the blanket drawn over Zuri's knees, the way Elijah's hand rested on the chair's handle like a claim without a shout. "I have a warrant," Harrell said, holding up the paper in a plastic sleeve, "for records and devices related to suspected deed fraud, forgery, and financial exploitation tied to this address. Marcus Darnell Williams, we need to talk." Marcus's mouth twitched into something that wanted to be a smirk. "Talk," he said. "Everybody's talking tonight." Harold's gaze dropped to the camera. "That device yours?" "It's my house," Marcus shot back, too quick, and the mistake landed in the room like a bad chord. Sharon didn't flinch. "It is my daughter's house," she said, steady, and slid the recorded deed an inch forward. Elijah didn't look down, but a corner of his mouth tightened like a man pulling a knot firm. Harold stepped in, careful of Zuri's chair, careful of the coffee table where documents lay like stones marking a crossing. He nodded at Miss Ortega. "Ma'am?" "Child is safe and staying," she said softly. "Your warrant still stands." He turned back to Marcus. "I'm seizing that camera," he said, "and this safe." Marcus curled his fingers tighter. "On what grounds?" he challenged. grasping at procedure the way a man might grasp a railing in a stairwell that's already broken. Harold lifted the sleeve with the judge's signature. "On these," he said. "And on a long trail of paper you left with your name on it when you tried to sell a thing you don't own." His eyes slid to the envelope on the table. "And on those deposits, which look a lot like money that should have gone to this child." "Money I used to feed her," Marcus muttered, but the room didn't believe him, and neither did his own face. Elijah held up his palms. "Detective, there's also an attempted illegal lockout and an assault on a mobility device. The uniform can speak to that." Harold nodded once to the older officer. "We'll add it." He held his hand out. "Mr. Williams, camera." Marcus hesitated. The blue light on the device winked like a dare. He looked at Tanika. She took half a step forward, then backward, torn between leaving and a loyalty that didn't look as good in real life as it did in her head. "Marcus," Tanika whispered, "give it." The air stretched thin. Zuri's eyes didn't leave the detective's hands. Then Marcus did a thing the room would remember later when they told this story to cousins and neighbors. He flipped the camera in his palm, tossed it lightly as if weighing it, and then, with a flick of his wrist, hurled it toward the sink. Two things happened at once. Bayo reached like a shortstop and plucked it from the air with both hands, solid, no flourish, the way men do who have learned to catch breakable things before they hit tile. And Elijah stepped forward, not fast enough to make it a fight, just fast enough to stand between the sink and Marcus like a line drawn in chalk. Harold didn't raise his voice. "We're not doing that," he said. "Not in front of a child, not on Christmas Eve." Marcus's jaw flexed. "You keep saying child like she's a judge." "She is a minor," Harold replied, "and the victim of tonight's crime. That puts her judgment above yours here." The word victim made Zuri's fingers still on the armrest. She didn't like it. She preferred other words: student, singer, player of chords. Sharon's hand squeezed her shoulder gently. "Names can change," her touch said. "This one will not stay." Harold slid an evidence bag from his coat and held it open. Bayo, careful, set the camera inside. Harold sealed it with a quiet rip of tape. He turned to the safe. "Anything else in there I should know about?" Marcus sneered. "You tell me. You're the detective." Harold crouched, not touching yet. "We'll inventory it downtown," he said. He straightened and looked up, calm as a steady drum. "Mr. Williams, please put your hands behind your back." Tanika gasped. "You said... I thought... You said they wouldn't..." Harold's voice stayed even. "You are being detained for questioning," he said to Marcus. "You are not under arrest at this moment. But if you obstruct again, or if what's in that envelope says what I think it says, that can change. You cooperate. You leave here in your own car. You don't? You leave here in mine." Marcus's eyes flicked to the door, to the hall, to Zuri's chair. For half a second, the room braced for stupid. Then he exhaled, shoulders dropping, and held out his wrists. Harold didn't cuff him. He didn't need to. He motioned to the older officer, who stepped forward to stand near, not on top of, like a fence you put up to keep animals from wandering into the highway. "Before we go," Harold said, glancing at Elijah, "there's a thing you should hear." He nodded to the camera bag. "We'll pull the footage, but I don't actually need it to prove what happened tonight." "Because of the neighbor's doorbell?" Elijah asked, already there. Harold allowed a hint of a smile. "Because of 3 neighbor doorbells," he said. "It's 2025. Everyone is Santa now, always watching the porch. We have clear video of your quiet evening. We have audio of Mr. Williams saying, 'Out now,' and of that wheelchair hitting the threshold. And we have the 911 call from Ms. Tanika. Tanika flinched. I only called because I got scared when he grabbed. She swallowed. I didn't think they'd really come. You did the right thing, Harold said, not unkind. That's not a crime. Marcus snapped his head toward her. You called? Stop! Sharon cut in, voice like a door that closes with a click you can hear 3 rooms away. No more going after women because they saved a child. Tanika's eyes went glassy. She pulled her coat tighter and stepped backward toward the porch, like a tide in a small bay turning. Ms. Ortega tucked her clipboard close. I'll file tonight, she said quietly to Sharon. This house is a safe place. I'll recommend a protection order. She glanced at Elijah, and that the court fast-tracked the guardianship hearing to lock the door legally. Elijah nodded, gratitude and grief and old exhaustion moving under his face like wind under water. Thank you. Harold held out a second evidence bag. Those check copies and deposit slips, he said, nodding at the envelope. I need them. And Ms. Williams, if you have your grandmother's book with the note you mentioned, keep it safe. Make me a copy of the lab report and the hospital memo. He paused. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you, Sharon said, and the words had more weight than 2 syllables usually do. Harold took one more slow look at the room, the way men do who understand that houses remember. He turned to Marcus. We'll talk at the station, he said. You can bring a lawyer. Elijah lifted his chin. Not me, he said, dry. Not you, Harold agreed, a real smile this time. They started toward the door, Harold, the older officer, Marcus, between them. At the threshold, Marcus twisted halfway back, finding Sharon, then Zuri, then Elijah. The smirk had fallen off somewhere near the evidence tape. In its place was something smaller and more dangerous, a promise he didn't have the power to keep. This isn't over, he said, voice low. Zuri met his eyes. You're right, she said, calm as a line of music. It's not. It's better. He flinched like the words had edges. Then he stepped into the cold. The door shut. The sirens dulled. The house pulled its shoulders up against the weather and exhaled. For a long 10 seconds, no one spoke. Then Bio set a plate of mac and cheese on the coffee table. Not fancy. Just an ordinary mercy finding a place to sit. Eat, he told Elijah quietly. Your blood sugar is making your eyes do that thing. Elijah's laugh startled him, small and honest. Yes, sir, he said, and sat where the couch dip knew his shape from years ago. Sharon turned to Ms. Ortega. Do you need anything else tonight? Ms. Ortega shook her head. No, I'm going to write up everything while it's fresh, she said. I'll call you in the morning. Her eyes softened when they landed on Zuri. Merry Christmas, she added. I mean that. Merry Christmas, Zuri said back, and somehow it didn't sound like a joke. Ms. Ortega slipped out, the older officer following after a last nod. The sirens faded completely, leaving only the steady tick of the old clock on the mantel and the whisper of sleet. In the quieter air, the house seemed to let down walls you didn't realize it was holding up. Sharon reached for the proverb book. The cloth was worn smooth, where thumbs had rubbed for decades. She opened it to the flyleaf where her grandmother's name was written in blue ink, Adesua Omoregie, and under it an address in Benin City she had not seen since she was a girl. Something crackled faintly. Sharon frowned, pressed her finger along the inside cloth seam. There was a tiny slit where the binding had come unglued. A narrow strip of paper, folded tight, slid into her hand like a bird escaping a cage. What is it? Elijah asked, leaning forward. Another note, in Grandma's hand, smaller than the one on lined paper. Sharon smoothed it against her thigh and read aloud, because secrets had done enough harm tonight. Sharon, it said, if this night is the one I thought it would be, look where the angel faces. Lift the third board. A small arrow pointed to a drawn sketch, a crude Christmas tree, a window, and a rectangle marked X. Bio was already moving. He crossed to the tree, crouched, and palmed the floorboards like a man finding the right drumhead to strike. 1, 2, he murmured, tapping. The third board gave a little under his fingers. He glanced up at Sharon. She nodded. He pried gently with the butter knife he kept in his pocket for small fixes. The board popped, not loud, just enough. He slid his fingers into the seam and lifted. Beneath the third board was a shallow pocket cut into the subfloor, lined with old cloth. Inside, wrapped in brown paper and tied with string, lay a bundle, no bigger than a book. Bayo lifted it and set it on the coffee table as if it could break or sing. Sharon untied the string. Inside were two things, a slim black ledger and a small brass key tied to a tag. On the tag was written, in Grandma's neat script, Storage 103, Azalea Depot. Elijah inhaled softly. She saved something, he said. Sharon opened the ledger. The first page had a list of names and amounts, tiny credits and debits in Grandma's hand, stretching back years. Mama Nkichi, $20 for plantains. Mr. Carter, $15 for snow shovel. Sharon, $80 for salon rent, repaid in 3 weeks. Each line ended with a check mark. People she loved, people she had helped, people who had paid her back when they could, how they could. It was a map of trust. Halfway through, the entries stopped being small. The numbers jumped. $3,000, $5,000, $1,200, each with notes. From festival booth, from sewing circle, from pastor's building fund returned after meeting. Sharon's finger halted there. Returned after meeting, she read, the words rolling like stones in her mouth. What meeting? Elijah leaned closer. Under the line, in brackets, Grandma had written, not for church, for house. At the back of the ledger, folded, was a receipt from Azalea Depot, a storage facility on the edge of town. Box 103, paid through December. Another slip, a hand-drawn map, showed a locker row and an X where the box would be. Zuri's eyes shone. It's like a scavenger hunt, she whispered, the child in her finding a piece of tonight that wasn't fear. Sharon closed the ledger on her palm and held up the key. It pinged in the quiet like a tiny bell. Tomorrow, she said, after we sleep, we'll go. Elijah looked at the clock. It perched just to the right of the leaning angel, an old brass thing that only kept time right when you turned it back twice a year and asked it nicely. The hands were near midnight. He stared longer than necessary. Sharon followed his gaze and realized what he was looking at, a slip of paper tucked at the clock's base, nearly invisible under a sprig of fake pine. She reached up and eased it free. Another one, Zuri breathed, half laugh, half wonder. Grandma loved puzzles, Bayo said, smiling for the first time that night. A real one. Sharon unfolded the slip. 4 words and a proverb for dessert. Don't read this alone. She looked up, and the room, for the first time, felt like a circle again, not a battlefield. She read, if the wind removes your roof, sleep under your neighbor's roof and plan another. Elijah sat back, eyes bright and wet. She always spoke in weather, he said. She lived long enough to know storms by name, Sharon replied. They were still there, bent over the ledger and the key, when the doorbell rang softly. No sirens, no heavy knock. Just a musical chime, 3 notes, like a question asked politely. Everyone froze. "Who is it at this hour?" Bio asked under his breath. Elijah looked at Sharon. "Expecting anyone?" "No," she said, suddenly aware of how thin the night was now that the noise had died. "Not now." Bio went to the door. He didn't open it. He called through the wood. "Who's there?" A woman's voice answered, firm but not unkind. "Reverend Lila Williams," she said. "Marcus's mother, pastor of New Light." The room trembled and found its footing again. Sharon's mouth dropped a fraction and closed. Elijah's jaw tightened. Zuri's hands slid to the wheels. Ready. Bayo looked back at Sharon, waiting. Sharon drew a breath that went all the way down and came back with steel. "Open," she said, "but leave the chain." He did. The door opened to the length of a chain. Outside stood a woman in a brown winter coat, with a church scarf tucked at her neck, a hat pinned properly, eyes that had made a congregation sit up straight for 20 years. Behind her, on the sidewalk, 2 women from the choir waited with their hands folded around a covered pan like peace offerings that steamed. "Good evening," Reverend Lila said, gaze sweeping the room, not missing the safe, the ledger, the wheelchairs, the angel, the empty place where her son had stood. "I heard there was a storm in my son's house." Her eyes landed on Sharon's face. "And in yours." "It is my daughter's house," Sharon said, not 1 inch mean, all inches true. Reverend Lila's jaw moved as if tasting the sentence, finding it surprisingly easy to chew. She nodded once. "Then that is the house I have come to," she said. "I need to speak with you." Her eyes slid to Elijah, then to Zuri, and held, softening a degree. "All of you." "We are resting," Elijah said calmly. "It's late." "It is Christmas Eve," Reverend Lila replied. "And a lie told on a holy night grows too fast if you let it sleep." She lowered her voice. "I won't take long. But you will want to hear what I have to say before morning." Bayo looked at Sharon again. It was her door. Sharon thought of Grandma's note. "Don't read this alone." She thought of the ledger. Of "returned after meeting." She thought of the whisper Harold had left unspoken, the other part of the story not yet turned over. She nodded to Bayo. He closed the door, unhooked the chain, and opened it wide. Reverend Lila stepped in, out of the cold. The choir women hovered, unsure. "We brought fried fish," one whispered, lifting the pan an inch like an apology. Sharon gestured them to the kitchen without words. In certain houses, food enters regardless of war. Reverend Lila didn't sit. She stood in the living room like it was her own pulpit, except tonight her voice was less sermon and more confession. "First," she said, and she didn't bother to look at the couch where her son had been, "I do not defend what Marcus did. He will answer for himself." "Good," Sharon said, and the single word was as clean as glass. "Second," Reverend Lila continued, "I came because the phone has been ringing since sunset. Not just from my son, from the bank, from Sister Tanya, from the clerk's office, from a lawyer whose name you know." "Elijah," Sharon murmured, but Reverend Lila shook her head. "Eddings," she said, "from Eddings and Nye. He is a deacon at New Light." She looked at Denise's empty spot by the door and nodded once to no one. "He asked me to bring this." She reached into her bag and pulled out a long white envelope. "He said to put it in the mother's hand and ask her to read the last page." Sharon didn't move. Elijah didn't either. They had had enough envelopes for one night. Then Zuri extended a hand. "It is my house," she said, not challenging. "Only reminding. I will hold it." Reverend Lila's mouth softened. She gave Zuri the envelope. Zuri passed it to Sharon. Sharon slid a fingernail under the glue and lifted, gentle as she would open a child's hand stuck to a lollipop. Inside were copies, stamped and signed. Some of it she recognized, the deed, the recordation receipt. Some of it was new. Elijah leaned so their shoulders almost touched. His eyes ran lines the way a mechanic runs fingers along a belt. He stopped when she stopped, at the last page. There, under legal type and clerk's signature, was a paragraph Grandma, or Eddings at her direction, had added as a condition to the transfer. A line Elijah had not seen. A line that didn't change title, but changed something else. "Notice to New Light Charitable Trust," Sharon read aloud, and Reverend Leela's eyes closed as if in prayer. "Pursuant to donor instruction, upon the vesting of title in the minor, Trust shall disperse funds held in reserve to complete all accessibility modifications, pay all outstanding medical balances in the child's name, and establish a 2-year household stipend for the guardian of record." Zuri made a sound that wasn't a word. Elijah's hand closed around the back of the couch like he needed to hold the room still. Theo exhaled a single laugh that had relief in it, and something like awe. Reverend Lila's chin lifted, and in her eyes sat something humbled. "Grandma," Sharon whispered, and her voice almost broke there. "You old lion." Reverend Lila nodded. "She came to me in August," she said quietly. She said, "Pastor, I have put a roof on the house with a paper nail, but I need a tithe returned to the child." I told her the trust money is for the church building. She said, "A church with no mercy is a shed with a songbook." We had a meeting. Her mouth tilted. She won. Sharon blinked tears away. "You sat across from my grandmother and told her no," she said. "Not harsh, just true." "I did," Reverend Lila said. "And then I told the board yes. The check is ready. It will clear tomorrow morning." She paused. She also made me promise something else. Her eyes moved to Elijah. "That I would tell you a truth tonight, before you repeat an old mistake." The room drew tight. Elijah's face didn't change, but the old anger, dull now, not burning, shifted under his ribs like a fish in deep water. "What truth?" he asked, tone even. Reverend Leela set her bag down and folded her hands in front of her like she does when a hymn is rising and she is waiting to enter on the right note. "That you are not the only man who signed a paper for this child," she said softly, "and that the second signature lives on a document you have not seen." Elijah's eyes went hard. "There is no second father," he said. "We have a test. We have a birth certificate." "I didn't say father," Reverend Lila replied. "I said a paper for this child." Sharon's mind raced. The ledger, the storage key, the band on Marcus's wrist in the photo. Returned after meeting. The way the pastor's name sat next to Eddings on church letterhead. The night had been a kiln for revelations. Did it have one more pot to bake? Reverend Lila's gaze landed on Zuri. "Baby," she said, and the word was kind, not patronizing. "Your grandmother asked me to tell you this in front of your mother and your father and your uncle and your whole house that loves you." She took a breath. "There is a second document recorded today. Not a deed. A trust indenture. It names you beneficiary, and it names 2 trustees." She looked at Sharon and then Elijah. "Your grandmother named your mother as primary trustee." She looked at Elijah. "And she named me as the second." Elijah's mouth opened, shut, opened again. "You?" he said, like a bad chord had just resolved into something different than he expected. Reverend Lila nodded, because she said, "The woman who tried to say no will be the woman who learns to say yes and mean it." And because she said, We cannot fix this neighborhood if the church keeps its money behind pulpits and not in kitchens. And because she needed someone